welcome into another edition of the Throwing Chairs podcast. We got a lot to talk about here. Our first in-person podcast ever since, I believe, the Kansas game. So it's been quite a long time. We're going to kind of ease ourselves back into this one. But as always, I'm your host, Hayden Smith, joined alongside the Hoosier Network's finest, Audrey Marr and Thomas Montalbano. Guys, let's get started with this episode. Like we get started with every episode, a little bit of an icebreaker. This one might have to get your juices flowing a little bit. If you had your own TV show, who would play you?
Whoa.
I like it. You're talking like famous actors and actresses?
Yeah. It could be anybody.
Okay.
I mean, if you wanted your dad to play you, I mean, sure, go for it.
He doesn't have the hair at the moment.
That is hilarious.
I'm trying to put real thought into this. Because it could be a real possibility one day. You never know.
You truly don't.
Yeah,
you truly don't.
You know, someone's gonna do it.
I'm trying to think of who you look like now, Thomas.
Well, you said Gosling a couple weeks ago, right? Is that your answer?
Yes, that is. That is mine.
Yeah, Gosling has to.
I don't think I look like him. You can be the judge of that. But
even that angle, you look like him.
Yeah, that freeze frame right there. That's great.
Are you kidding?
That's funny.
That's not for me to judge, so I guess I'll go with Ryan Gosling. I guess I'm Ken in my TV show.
Who's Hayden Smith? I only know Ryan Gosling of the Hoosier Network.
That's what I'm just going to start ending everything with. I'm your host, Ryan Gosling.
Like, I don't know. I don't have a good answer. I'm almost just trying to think more of actors that I like more than who I think looks like me. I don't really know who looks like me, but for people I like,
I'm almost going to say like a young Robert De Niro.
That's crazy. I love that. I love De Niro. I'll certainly take that. I'll certainly take that.
I can see it. Yeah.
I'll certainly take De Niro.
I kind of see
like, I
Audrey?
literally, I don't even know who looks like me or who I look like. I just have to think of, there's a million actresses that are brunettes, so I can just kind of go
honestly,
along
like, off the
lines.
top of my head, I don't have, like, a billion brunette actresses in my head, but off the top of my head, like, maybe like Anne Hathaway, and you gave her like blue contacts or something.
I was thinking
if she
maybe
had your
Anne
eyes,
Hathaway,
like,
but that is a statement. I don't think I am Anne Hathaway.
Those are three great
And
options.
I don't think I'm Ryan Gosling.
And I'm certainly not Robert De Niro.
I don't think there is a role
De
that
Niro,
Anne
Hathaway, and Gosling in here. Well, we got a
people watching this might be, what the hell are these guys talking about? But that's okay.
This is a stacked podcast today, so let's just get into it, guys. It's certainly a rough start in the Big Ten play for Indiana, especially to start off 2024. They get started with a 16-point loss at Nebraska, bounce back with the solid victory against the Ohio State Buckeyes back at home, and then were recently defeated against the Rutgers Scarlet Knights 66-57. Guys, now they're 3-2 in Big Ten play, one win in the last 3 games. Just want your quick thoughts on how you all have thought 2024 started for the Hoosiers.
I think Ohio State was one of Indiana's best games that they've played so far, but the other two are probably among the worst that Indiana has played so far. It's very early in the season, so I don't think that any of these last couple games is going to determine how Indiana's season plays out. But there are many, many very glaring issues that they have had that need to be addressed. But again, there are positives, there are negatives, but it's not even, it's the middle of the season right now. There's still plenty of time to go.
Yeah, I think Audrey hit the nail on the head. There's a lot of time left, but I don't think it's been the best start to 2024, and I don't want to get too into it because we're going to hit it with segment 2 with what's right and what's wrong. But Ohio State, they look good, and it was a nice bounce back from Nebraska where they looked, quite frankly, it sounded like the complete opposite. Again, I missed that game. I was driving back. And then following Ohio State with Rutgers, and that might have been the most hard-watch basketball game I've seen this entire season. So it's not the start that I was expecting. I'm sure it's not the start that the Hoosiers were expecting, and there's definitely a lot to pick up.
Yeah, I'd say minus that Ohio State game, like you said, Audrey, it's probably one of the better games we've seen Indiana play this year against an Ohio State team that is very respectable around maybe the middle of the pack in Big Ten play. They're much improved, vastly improved from where they were at this point last season. But beyond that Ohio State game, I mean, the 2 games on the road we know, and a lot of Indiana fans know, how big the disparity is for the Hoosiers whenever they play at home in Assembly Hall and then whenever they play on the road. They're just a totally different team. But in past years, you've seen Indiana at least compete in some of these games. I didn't see any competitiveness in that Nebraska game, and especially that Rutgers game. Both were just absolutely that was an unmotivated Indiana team. That's where I thought Indiana really struggled the most. There was no motivation, no leadership out there, and I think that's exactly where they need to improve on. And a lot of people so far, I believe, could be overreacting to how this start has been for Indiana, but I want to get your all's thoughts. Do you think that fans are starting to overreact? I've already seen some start to call for head coach Mike Woodson's head at this point in the season. Is it an overreaction based on where Indiana is right now, or do you all think it's justifiable?
I think it is a little bit of an overreaction. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people about this, and everyone is so used to Indiana's history. So they look at their past wins and they look at their past coaches, and they look at right now, and Indiana isn't playing the way that any fans would be hoping. Mm-hmm. But again, it's so early. I mean, there's nothing to cancel the season over. So, I mean, Mike Woodson has gotten them into the tournament 2 times already, and it's just he is doing good things to this program compared to other years that Indiana has been playing. So I do think people are overreacting. I'll just end it there.
I think that was well said. Definitely, I think people are overreacting. We're, I think, just above halfway through the season. We still have 15 games left. There's a lot of time to correct a lot of what has gone wrong and a lot of time to change people's minds. But at the same time, I do think we're nearing that point where the season is heading towards a failing season compared to a successful season. I don't think we're at that point yet, and I think there's a lot of time until we get to that point. But I do think we are heading in that direction compared to the opposite.
Well, especially, I see where the overreaction is, and I see where the reaction of the fans are, because it is the same problems every single time. I saw a really good analogy by somebody, and it kind of made me laugh at the same time. You've probably seen the same one, that whenever you order something from a restaurant and they get it wrong, and you send it back, and then they get it right the next time, you don't overreact too much. But whenever you have to send it back 20 different times, that's where you realize
for the same problem,
wrong,
right.
For the same exact problem. And that's kind of where we've seen Indiana at this point. It's the last couple games, especially to start off 2024, the offensive rebounding. Again, that it doesn't take any talent to be able to rebound the basketball. It just takes heart and desire to be able to box somebody out, put your butt in the defender, and just move them out of the way, and then go grab the rebound. And then the three-point shooting obviously has been a area of concern. Granted, I believe Indiana's starting to get a little bit better at shooting the three-point ball. I think they just need to chuck up a little bit more. And then the free throws, of course. They absolutely horrendous against Rutgers on Tuesday. But again, I believe it is an overreaction. I see where the reaction is. Again, it's been a rough start, but also don't forget where Indiana was around this point last year, where they went on that 3-game losing streak, and then they turned it around and went on a 5-game winning streak and completely turned their season upside down. So don't take all this with a grain of salt. Granted, there is a big schedule coming up for Indiana where they play 3 quad 1 teams.
Yeah, and I think that you made a good point about they had that big stretch where things really started to get set in motion, and that's because they had Trace Jackson Davis going on that 10-game incredible streak.
Yes.
All Indiana needs right now is a playmaker. They need a playmaker and they need a leader. So if they can find, I don't know if anyone's going to be stepping in the shoes that Trace Jackson Davis did, but
those shoes are too big to fill.
Those shoes are way too big to fill. But Indiana just needs someone like that to really lead them through these next couple of games and get them the confidence on the court that they need, because they don't have really someone right now to be that's continuously on the court to be lifting them them up in these times that they are down and they don't know how to pick themselves back up.
I will throw this question out at you all right now, though. Who could that person be where Indiana could go to whenever the going gets tough? Again, like we just said, I don't think there is anybody on that court right now that has that ability, but who do you all think could end up making that next step?
I mean, I immediately just first thought in my head has to be Xavier Johnson, for me at least. Mm-hmm. He's already missed a big chunk of this season. He obviously missed all of last, or not all, but more than half last season. Yes. That's why he's back this season. And this season, you would imagine, has to mean more to him than anybody. And especially at this point where he is right now, he's struggled in 2 of the past 3 games since his return. Struggled mightily, I might add. And if he is the designated leader by his title of captain, along with Trey Galloway, and
just has to act like it.
Now he just has to act like it. And so, off the top of my head, that's my immediate thought: Xavier Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, Xavier Johnson, he even said in that presser just a couple weeks ago that he does need to grow up. In that Ohio State game, he said he did grow up, but we saw something completely different in Rutgers. And I think, yes, Xavier Johnson is the clear answer. But another person that Mike Woodson pointed out was Anthony Leal. And I think that's why he's been getting these extra minutes as well. It's because he is an amazing leader on the court. And Woodson said that there's nothing that needs to change with his leadership. But that leadership is coming off of the bench. So that's not something that you continuously get any fire from continuously. But I think someone that I even heard on the broadcast, because I wasn't able to go to the game, they're talking about CJ Gunn, who during the I don't know what point in the game it was, but they were obviously visibly tired, and they were just not in the right headspace. And CJ Gunn had walked up to him and just completely started to lift them up and be like, lift your head up, come on, like get out of this. So I think everyone is starting to realize that they really do. It's a team. Like they need to come together. They need to lift each other up, and that's the way that they will be successful into the rest of the season.
I want to say one thing real quick. It's interesting that I say Xavier Johnson. You said CJ Gunn. A couple weeks ago, I think it was after the Ohio State game, X talked a little bit about his struggles off the court and his cracked foot and told us about that injury. And then CJ also told us about what it's been like for the team with X off the court and how they've been there to help off the court. So you're exactly right. It is a team effort, and maybe it's not that down to just one individual. It is this entire team to help lift each other up whenever they can, whenever they need.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I mean, I do believe, yes, X should be the guy that Indiana can go to whenever the going gets tough, but I haven't seen it just yet. You saw it in flashes against the Ohio State game, but that's because he's playing well. Now, whenever he's not playing well, that's whenever X gets into his head and he makes the mistakes like he did against Rutgers and gets a flagrant 2 foul and ejected from the ball game. That's where he has to start growing up and starting to mature a lot faster than he is right now. Because, yet you're not always going to play like you do against Ohio State, and you're not going to have 18 points and play as efficiently as you did with 0 turnovers. You're not going to have that all the time. There's going to be a lot of teams that are going to pressure you, and you're going to cough the ball up every now and then. But in those moments, that's whenever you have to collect yourself and collect your teammates as well. And again, I haven't seen that from X yet. A guy that comes to mind, he's only a sophomore, Malik Renew. I mean,
I was going to say him too.
He's easily the best player on that floor, but I don't see, at least from what I can see and from what I can hear, I don't see or hear him being a leader on the court. It might be completely different. Of course, we're not in the locker room. We're not in there during practice. We have no idea who's actually speaking up and trying to get the team going. But looking at the landscape of the roster, I think it's got to be Malik Renew, Xavier Johnson, Trey Galloway. It's got to be all those senior guards. It's got to be Anthony Walker, Anthony Leal. It just has to be, like you said, Audrey, a team effort, because that's exactly what this team is. They just all have to come together as a collective unit and get the job done. We just haven't seen that just yet.
With that point with Renew, you also have to imagine that he's obviously the clear number one option for scoring and for getting the offense going and for the success of the team. And you have to imagine when things aren't going so well, forget the scoring, they also in some capacity look to Renew for that leadership. So you're exactly right. I can see that.
Let's move on to segment 2, guys. This is what is right, what is wrong about Indiana's play at this point in the season, especially in the last couple games in Big Ten play. Let's start off with the wrong. Guys, what can Indiana really improve on moving forward? They've got Minnesota coming up this Friday, and then after that, like I said, 3 quad 1 teams at home against Purdue, on the road against Wisconsin, where they haven't won the Kohl Center in a couple decades at that, and then they play at Illinois. Guys, what can Indiana do better?
I think it starts with what we were just talking about, is leadership, and they need to just stay composed when they're down, because there are going to be points that Indiana has seen what they have seen these last couple games, and that is these massive runs where the other team will most likely take the lead and they will be on a hot stretch. That is just Big Ten play as it is. And they need to really pull themselves together, because that's something that has really been the downfall for Indiana in these last couple of games. And specifically looking at Minnesota, they're really going to need to be careful about turnovers. And while they don't have that issue as much at home, Maryland had 17 turnovers in their last game against Minnesota. So Minnesota is a team that will most likely try and force these turnovers. And then, again, offensive rebounds. They need to be careful with that. I'm sure there will also be a lot of free throw shooting in practices this week. That's really solely looking at the Rutgers game. But those are just the 4 things that are very glaring in away games. And while Indiana does have Assembly Hall and their fans behind them, they need to be careful, because these teams are used to that environment at this point, and will be looking at those weak spots for Indiana.
Yeah, I wrote down a lot of improvements, so I'm just going to hit them.
There's a lot to talk about.
Yeah. Consistent shooting for one. I won't get too into that, other than the fact that it needs to be better. I mean, last game was really bad. On both ends, I will say. It was a really hard game to watch, but the shooting hasn't been great. Turnovers, Audrey just hit that, but they had 19 against Nebraska and 18 against Rutgers. Granted, those were both on the road, but those are very, very rarely ever going to win you games. They had 4 against Ohio State, which was a very nice bounce back after Nebraska. And also Xavier Johnson, him specifically with the turnovers, 5 against Nebraska, 4 last game. But he did have 0 against Ohio State, which was nice, and he touched on that after the press conference. The free throw shooting. They have shot 50 over the last 3 games, which is great. They're getting to the line, which is one of the things I have down for what they're doing right. But hitting them is not great. They've hit 29 out of those 50 over the last 3 games, which is 58%.
Wow.
Woodson's emphasized it throughout the entire season. They're free. You got to knock them down. I mean, that was one of the difference makers last game. And I'm not going to say it could have won them the game, but it would have been a different game if they hit those free throws. Rebounding, Audrey touched on that. They've been out-rebounded by 33 over the last 2 games. That's shocking. They somehow won the Ohio State one when they got out-rebounded by 22. And then lastly, I have the rotations. I don't know. That's a whole nother thing, but the rotations aren't working.
Yeah, I will say, for a team that is the 3rd tallest team on average in the nation, how are you getting out-rebounded like this in some of these ball games against teams that are considerably shorter than you? I mean, you're the 3rd tallest team in the nation. You got to start acting like it. I'm going to say my wrong, and Thomas, you briefly touched on it right there at the end, and I'm going to preface this by saying Mike Woodson is an incredible coach, and he has proved that time and time again through his now 3 years at Indiana, his constant years in the NBA. He was a great player. He knows what he's doing. So I'm not throwing this on Woodson, and I'm not saying that he is a bad coach. All I'm saying is that the rotations need to be fixed. I understand that you have to take starters out at some point. They can't play 48 minutes. That's the NBA. They can't play 40 minutes. I've been playing way too much NBA 2K as of recent. You can tell that I'm a great coach in NBA 2K, not in real life. But again, I know you can't play your starters a whole 40 minutes a game, but there's points where you can stagger them to keep a couple starters in the game at all times. The bench has been decent in a couple games, but for the most part, a whole bench unit has not been keys to success for Indiana. And I can pull up the analytics for you, but I'm going to save the trouble. But just looking at the games that Indiana has played, and whenever they put in at least 4 bench guys, it's the lineup of Anthony Walker, C.J. Gunn, I believe Gabe Cupps, and Peyton Sparks. Those 4 together, I believe their plus minus is around minus 200.
Oh my goodness.
Which is absolutely ridiculous. So again, I'm not saying Woodson is a bad coach, and there was a whole ordeal after the Rutgers game. A question was brought up about the rotations, and Woodson was rightfully upset about it. I just believe the question might have been a little poorly phrased. Again, he's not a bad coach. Just something has to change, and I believe you've got to keep at least Malik Renew or Kel'el Ware has to be in the game at all times, because with both of them out on the bench, Indiana is just a far worse team than they usually are.
I think it also kind of goes back to their guard play, because
You're exactly right.
it has not been consistent. It has not really even been there these last couple of games. And while it was there for Ohio State with Xavier Johnson, I mean, they don't have really one guard stepping up in these games.
No.
It's really just the big men that are producing for Indiana in these last couple of games. So it really starts with there. Usually guards are the ones that lead these teams down the stretch, and they're just not there. And their production really needs to grow, and they need to figure out ways that, yes, one either Renew or Ware can stay in the game, but also a consistent guard can stay in the game and lead them down the stretch as well.
You're exactly right. And so, speaking of right, let's turn a little bit of a positive here, and let's talk about what has really gone right for Indiana in the last couple games. Thomas, I'll start off with you, because it sounded like you had a couple on your mind.
Well, my list for what's going right is not nearly as long as my list for what's going wrong, but I do have a couple notes. I think shooting the threes, they've shot 56 over the last 3 games. That's great. That's not at all what we saw at the beginning of the season.
And they're falling.
Yeah. They've hit 21 out of those 56, which is 38%. You will certainly take that compared to the beginning of the season.
Better than it has been.
Exactly, 100%. So I have that for getting right, for doing right. And then the other thing I have written down for what they're doing right is what I mentioned sort of in doing wrong is getting to the line. Now, knocking down those free throws is very much a glaring issue, but getting to the line they have been better at, and they've actually been pretty good at. So,
Yeah, I'm going to go, it kind of does go along with three-point shooting, but the production of the big men, which is the point I was just touching on. I mean, Kel'el Ware, Malik Renew, and Mackenzie Mbako all ended with 13 points against Rutgers. They really just led Indiana down the charge, and really almost every game that they've been on, seeing more in these last couple of games. Malik Renew especially, obviously, he's really turning into one of Indiana's key roles. And I think that's something that we're going to continue to see. I think this is the way that Indiana functions, and they really rely on Kel'el Ware down in the paint, Mackenzie Mbako, and then Mackenzie Mbako, beyond the arc, and then Malik Renew also in the paint. So they are definitely the key positive for Indiana so far.
I will say, and like you said, Thomas, the three-point ball is actually falling for Indiana now. Now I believe it's time to start taking a little bit more threes. They've taken a decent amount for Indiana standards in the last 3 games. But now that they're falling, I say you let them fly a little bit more. Now, that doesn't mean that some guys that should not be shooting threes start shooting them. You've got to have the right guy shooting. And I'm going to be honest, I think one of the best three-point shooters on the team right now, call me crazy, is Malik Renew. I mean,
you're not crazy.
He's knocking them in very confidently. I can't believe I'm saying this, because I remember last season, whenever Renew would chuck up a three, I'd be praying that it's at least going to hit the rim. It was the same with Race Thompson last season every time he chucked one up. But he's starting to knock them in. So I think you maybe get a couple pick and pops with Malik Renew. He knocks in a couple threes, and then teams are obviously going to start to respect him from outside, and that's whenever he can use his body and then drive inside. So I think they're starting to knock in a couple threes, and they need to start taking a few more. Another guy I believe has been starting to get a bigger role, and we mentioned him earlier, C.J. Gunn. I think if he can become that spark plug off the bench, it creates a whole new environment for Indiana, because they really don't have that bench guy that can come off the bench and get them a couple points. Like, kind of, I hate to say it because he actually had a pretty rough year last year. He's doing great with Missouri right now, but Tamar Bates, he was looked on as that guy that could produce on the bench, really struggled in a lot of aspects last season, but he was a guy the year before where he was able to knock in a couple shots from the outside and get Indiana going. That's exactly where you could see CJ Gunn going in the next couple games, and I think if they can get him there, he had 10 points against Ohio State and really lit a fire under Indiana and allowed them to get some of those runs going and really start to pull away from the Buckeyes.
Yeah, and that's something that you've been seeing CJ Gunn as minutes improve and as minutes increase. And I think that's something that will continue to be apparent because this is a team right now that the guard play is not apparent, and he's been that role that comes in as a substitution to really either for Xavier Johnson or Trey Galloway or Gabe Cupps when he's in for a while. But, I mean, Gabe Cupps is definitely there on the defensive end, and he's definitely very consistent in that for the Hoosiers. But CJ Gunn, I think we've seen him really improve his shot making ability, and I think that he's only a sophomore, so he's
improved on the defensive end a lot
He's
too.
improved really on all ends of the court. So I think that's something that you'll continue to see. Yes, there are those games that may be a little bit slower than others, but I think that with the way that he's been playing away, with Indiana not playing well on the road, I think to see that, especially with the environment of Assembly Hall behind him, I think he's going to feed off of that, especially at home. And then the more and more he's going to continue to grow, and I see him being a massive, massive piece for this Indiana bench.
Yeah, Hayden, just a couple points back to what you were saying. Yeah, you want to see them shooting more threes. But we saw a good glimpse of that last game. They shot 56 over the last 3 games. They shot 26 alone last game. And they only knocked down 7 of those, but shooting 26, I think that's a good number for what we might be looking for. Now, for CJ Gunn, you guys said it. I won't add too much other than he was definitely feeling it during that Ohio State game. We saw a little bit of the gun show where he shot the guns at the crowd. That was awesome after a big 3. So, yeah, CJ Gunn has been playing well. Hopefully he can continue carrying it through this Big Ten slate.
And speaking of a rocking Assembly Hall crowd, we've got some big games coming up for Indiana. We'll start off with the first of the 2-game homestand for the Hoosiers. Minnesota comes into town Friday night. Guys, this is a Minnesota team that is 77th in KenPom, but have won 7 straight contests. Most recently, I believe that one was against Maryland. Yes, that's exactly right. Their last 2 wins against Michigan and Maryland. Indiana beat both of them as well. They played Michigan on the road, won that. Played Maryland at home, won that. Exactly how Indiana played out. Guys, is this a must-win for Indiana? We're getting to that point into the season where you're starting to think if Indiana loses this game, then it might snowball after this. Is it a must-win?
I don't want to say yes, and I don't want to say no. I think it'll be a massive result either way. If they win, it'll be massive for this Indiana team. If they lose, it'll be massive for this Indiana team. Minnesota is a good 12-3 team, and I think really any Big Ten win is a good win, is a big win. So, I mean, I think it'll be interesting. This game will say a lot. I think how they adjust to what happened at Rutgers. I think they're going to come out of the gates hot, and that's really how they did against Ohio State after that brutal loss in Lincoln. I think this will be a game that they do really produce well for. I don't know the result just yet. We'll get into our predictions in a little bit, which is going to be a tough one for me. But I also think going ahead against Purdue, that game is going to be close.
Yes.
Every rivalry game is close. Every rivalry game is massive. So, I mean, you even look back to them playing number 2 Kansas. They only lost to them by 4.
Yep.
So,
And led nearly the whole way.
Yeah, pretty much. So, yes, Indiana definitely has had some weak spots, but they have had a lot of strong spots as well. So to see how those are all utilized in Minnesota will be the result pretty much of this game.
Thomas.
I'm going to say yes. I don't think the season is on the line against Minnesota, but I do think it's a must-win. If you look at their schedule, they don't really have many quote-unquote must-wins remaining, and if you were to assign must-wins to certain games, I would call this one of them. They're at home. They're coming off a pretty tough loss in I'm going to describe it as a winnable loss. They looked super ugly, but that was a winnable game.
Oh, yeah. There's no question.
Yep.
And yeah, I just, my main point, like they have a tough remaining schedule. And compared to the rest of that schedule, Minnesota is a game that they would certainly like a win under their belt, especially at home. I'm going to call it a must-win.
Yeah, I'm with you, Thomas. I do think this is a must-win for Indiana, mainly because, again, you just need a bounce back after the Rutgers game. And looking at Indiana's schedule this year, they have been relatively good in bounce-back games. I mean, even you look at after the Auburn game where Indiana got destroyed 104-76, they played really well against Kansas and nearly knocked off one of the top teams in the country. Granted, they lost, but it was still a good bounce-back game. Beyond that, Indiana's been able to win nearly every game that they have lost prior to besides the Kansas game. So they've been particularly well in these bounce-back games, but they just have to stop the bleeding because the Ohio State game was good, but it was a little bit closer than what it probably should have been, especially right there at the end. Indiana just really hasn't been able to close out games relatively well this season. That's why the score was as close as it was whenever it was all said and done. But another reason that this is such a must-win game is because, again, you've got Purdue next, Wisconsin next, Illinois next, and then you play a team that always has your number in the Iowa Hawkeyes back at home.
Yeah.
You've got a really tough schedule in Big Ten play coming up. You just need something to get yourself feeling good whenever you go in and you come back home to play the Purdue Boilermakers on Tuesday. Guys, we'll get into some of our predictions now. Player or players to watch for that game against Minnesota.
Thomas, you want to go first?
Thomas, go for it.
Yeah, I'll go. Let me think for a second. Player to watch. I'm going to go with the man I just wrote my story on, who we've talked a lot this episode. I'm going to go with Xavier Johnson. Indiana needs a leader. This guy is the designated leader. And, besides Indiana needing a win in a great game, Xavier Johnson kind of needs a win in a great game for himself. He had that against Ohio State and then kind of just undid all of that last game against Rutgers. And I'm going to go with Xavier Johnson for Minnesota.
Audrey.
I'm stuck between two because one of them I have down for my Purdue player to watch, so I don't know.
You can have both.
That's gonna be. I'm gonna go with Malik Renew here.
Okay.
I think
He's got a tough matchup against Dawson Garcia, one of the best bigs in the Big Ten.
I think him and Kel'el Ware are both going to be really a 1-2 punch that Indiana needs on Friday. And you've seen how Malik Renew has been playing at home in these last recent games. So I think, like many of these other games, we're going to see Minnesota in this game really put their primary focus on one of them. So it's going to be whoever they put their focus on, the other player is going to be my player to watch. So I see that being Malik Renew right now, and I see them putting their focus a lot on Kel'el Ware because he has that height advantage. And Malik Renew, I think, I do think we'll see them on one at a time on the court a lot throughout the game now, but I'm going to stop talking. I'm just going to go Malik Renew now.
Thomas, I'm going to agree with you. I think Xavier Johnson is going to be the player to watch because, again, how does he respond after being ejected from the game against Rutgers? And I didn't look, and this is on me for being unprepared for the podcast, but I don't know if I believe that might have been Xavier Johnson's first ejection of his career. I'd have to look back and double check that, but based on what I've seen in social media, I would not be shocked if during the starting lineups you hear a couple boos from the Indiana crowd whenever Xavier Johnson is announced, which I would hate to hear that because, again, he's trying, but he's just had a rough stretch and he's gotten into his head. And, again, he's still trying to fight his way back from a tough injury. Again, I believe that was the first time anybody said publicly what his exact injury was whenever he released that it was a crack in his foot, which, again, that is not an easy injury to come back from. So, again, he might just still be trying to dust off the rust from that injury. But, again, it's just how is he going to respond against Minnesota, and especially just how he is mentally moving forward. Guys, we'll get going with our score predictions on this ball game. I can tell you two are kind of hesitant on what you guys want to say. So I'll get started first, so we can set a little bit of groundwork here during our score prediction. I believe it's probably a must-win for Indiana against the Golden Gophers at home. But again, it is a home game for Indiana, so I believe the Hoosiers will have Assembly Hall behind their backs, and they're going to have another good bounce-back game. I'll take Indiana 74-67 over the Minnesota Golden Gophers. Who wants to go?
I'll go. I think my score. I'm changing my score.
Oh.
I looking at Minnesota, their opponents average around 66 points.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that this will be a bit more of a low-scoring game.
Okay.
Not very low-scoring, but I am going to go 68-63 Indiana.
Okay.
I'm going to go Indiana here. I agree with you. I think that Indiana is going to have Assembly Hall behind their backs, and I think that we've seen it in many other games. They really bounce back in these games that they had poor games prior. So I think that they're going to really fix a lot of those mistakes that were glaring in those away games, and I think they're going to bounce back and come out with the win.
Mr. Jalen Brunson, take it away.
All right, I just have to, before I say, I have to point out that I swear I nailed the exact score for Ohio State, 71-65.
We gave unofficial score
Yeah, we
predictions.
gave unofficial scores before the game.
Hayden asked me and Audrey right before tip-off what we think the score was, and we cannot confirm that I said that, but I am 97% sure that I said 71-65 on the head.
I don't think we're really keeping score anymore, but
Yeah.
I've got to say, I think I'm winning right now in the score prediction.
If I say the exact score, that has to be bonus points. That has to be bonus points.
But I think that we're tied. I think that we're tied. You picked another game that they lost in, and we predicted that they were going to win.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes,
I think we're
that
tied.
happened. I believe that happened for the Auburn game.
That happened for the Auburn game. It was another game too.
No, yeah.
Well, I
Audrey's 100% right.
remember I picked Nebraska to beat Indiana on the road in our Zoom.
I don't know if I did that.
I agree. That was a loss that we picked, but there was another game that you got wrong.
Well,
I know that there is.
We'll have to get back to you.
It was Ohio State. It was Ohio State.
Oh yeah, it was Ohio State. Yeah, it was Ohio State.
It was Ohio State.
That was unofficial.
No, it was not. It was not unofficial. It was not unofficial. We're tied. Hayden picked Ohio State to win. Thomas,
give us your score prediction.
I just have to say, if it was official, I have to be in the lead for nailing the exact score. But whatever. For this game, Minnesota, I'm gonna go. I have IU. I'm gonna go 74-67. 74-67.
So we got the same
that's the
score?
exact score. No, I can't do that.
What are you trying to do
I'm just
here,
like looking at your score. I'm like, yeah, Thomas, I'm gonna go
I know.
74-67.
Yeah, I picked that
I know
one.
you want to follow in my
doing that.
footsteps,
All right.
Thomas. I'm really touched.
Definitely not.
Definitely not.
I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding. I do have IU. I do want a similar score.
I'm about
I
to
can't
walk
even
out.
think now anymore.
All right, Thomas.
Oh, gosh, just let it come
I'm
to you.
going to add 3 points to both of them. 77-70 IU.
All right.
Okay.
Respectable. Now
That was a very chaotic last 5 minutes that just went on.
Very
right there.
well. We've got a couple more minutes here before we wrap things up because we will not meet again until Indiana takes on Purdue here at Assembly Hall, a whiteout in Simon Scott Assembly Hall in Bloomington, Indiana. Guys, it just does not get better than Indiana against Purdue. Indiana is winners of the last 2 matchups and 3 of the last 4, and they have really been on a hot streak against their rivals from West Lafayette. Guys, what will it take for Indiana to knock off rival Purdue for the 3rd consecutive game?
I think that really just the one thing that's going to be crucial for Indiana is to see how Kel'el Ware and Zach Edey match up.
Yes.
That will be the telling point of the game. Kel'el Ware, how tall, what's the height difference?
7'3", I believe, is
Zach Edey?
Zach Edey.
Okay, so Zach Edey has the height advantage.
7'4",
But
7'4", 300.
Kel'el Ware has
Yama numbers.
the shooting advantage. Kel'el Ware has the shooting advantage. I don't think we've seen Zach Edey down a 3. He's been trying.
He took his first career 3 and missed.
and missed. So he's been trying,
Womp
but
womp.
Kel'el Ware has been knocking them down. So I think Kel'el Ware does have the shot-making advantage.
Yes.
But Zach Edey definitely has the advantage in the paint. But still, Kel'el Ware is a monster in the paint as well. So right now, looking from the outside in, Kel'el Ware does have a bit more of an advantage. But to see how that plays out, I don't think Kel'el Ware has ever matched up with Zach Edey before.
No.
So, or really someone of his size. So to see how he adjusts in that, again, with his shot-making ability and his monster,
Kel'el Ware has matched up with Ballo from Arizona last season, which Ballo, I believe, was 7'1", 7'2", and probably nearly outweighs Zach Edey.
Yeah.
Ballo was a absolute monster with the Wildcats, but please continue.
So yeah, I mean that really does add another factor that he does have a little bit of experience in that, and he played well. So I do think overall with Assembly Hall behind him, Kel'el Ware does have more of the advantage. But to see how that ends up, Zach Edey definitely doesn't have the advantage when it comes to the Assembly Hall crowd.
Not at all.
But that will be key. I think also the guards, pretty much they just need to clean up their play. For Purdue, the guards are one of their one of the best in the nation.
Yes,
So
no question.
they're a massive strength for that strong Boilermaker team. So if the Indiana guards can clean up their play and Kel'el Ware, Malik Renew, all strong inside the paint, that will be a big tell to see if Indiana can knock off Purdue.
Well, I don't have too much to add to that, Audrey.
Sorry,
Definitely
I
nailed
went on a
majority of it.
spree.
No, that was great. That was great. I mean, I couldn't agree more. It's going to come down to the guard play and Ware and Renew and Edey. I mean, there's not too much more. It's going to be a close game. We touched on that earlier. No matter what, I think it's going to be a close game. And I think another factor that's going to play a big role is the crowd. I mean, we're Indiana's home at Assembly Hall. Obviously, that's a very big factor.
Yep.
And you know, it's played a factor over the last couple of years. We have incredible memories against Purdue, especially in recent years. And I think the crowd can actually play a role in the game.
Back to the crowd, I mean, they're probably going to have a lot more energy because now what came out was that they are not allowing fans to camp out because of the really cold temperatures.
Boo.
Yeah. So, yeah, that stinks. But
Safety, boo.
Boo. I want
health
to
and
freeze.
safety, boo. But I think that obviously now that they're assigning seats, they're going to be a lot more energetic, a lot more prepared for this game. They're going to be warm, and
definitely a
they're
good point to
going.
make.
I think that'll be a massive factor. So I think, while definitely staying for 5+ hours out in the cold will definitely be a motivator. I think that they will just come in just a lot more energized. So
Yeah, again, I mean, both of you hit the nail on the head. They have to be able to contain 7'4" Zach Edey. He's one of the best players. He is probably the best player in the NCAA at the current moment. Absolute beast. How are they going to be able to contain him? Finally, Indiana has a 7-footer that can match up against him. They had Michael Durr 2 years ago that had to come off the bench whenever Trace Jackson-Davis got in foul trouble, did really well against Edey. Again, how does Kel'el Ware really match up against him? He's done really good on some of the best bigs in the nation that so far this season against Donovan Clingan and Hunter Dickinson, but Zach Edey is just a whole new monster. And how will Indiana be able to contain Purdue's guard play between Hayden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer, easily two of the best guards in the nation? Lance Jones has been absolutely phenomenal for the Boilermakers this season. He's been phenomenal. Trey Kaufman-Wren, shout out Silver Creek High School. He was an alum from there in Southern Indiana. They've got a lot of great talent on this Purdue roster. Probably could be the national champions this season if they can really produce in March. So Indiana's really got to be careful against the Boilermakers, guys. Before we get our score predictions, players to watch.
I'm going to go with Trey Galloway here.
Okay.
I think that he really does. We see him perform a lot better at home than on the road, and he really
And in
does
the bright
feed
lights.
in the bright lights. Exactly. So he's really the only player on this roster right now that truly understands the rivalry between Purdue and Indiana. He's the Indiana native. Yes, Xavier Johnson's been there for a while. Anthony Leal is another, but he comes off the bench. Trey Galloway is the starter. He's the captain. He's been here for a while, and he's been in those 3 games that they have won consecutively over Purdue.
Yes.
So I think that he really, really feeds from this crowd. I think he has a very big game, and I think that he does step into that leadership role because, again, he's really the only person on the court that understands the severity of this game.
Yeah, I thought that was very well said. I honestly couldn't agree more, and he would be my number 1 player to watch, but I'll let you claim him. No, don't be sorry. I agree with almost every podcast.
We've already made the rule earlier this season that you can get multiple.
Give me Trey Galloway, and I'll add.
There you go.
I'm thinking Xavier Johnson again.
Okay.
I think it
Guard play, yeah.
Guard play. 100%.
You're exactly right.
And a lot of that also is kind of I'm going to be looking at. Obviously, the Minnesota game, he's my player to watch from Minnesota. But for Purdue, how did he play in Minnesota? You know, if it's another poor performance, it's that much more that he's tacking onto himself, not only mentally, but to bounce back in that Purdue game. And if he plays great, continue it into Purdue. And so I'll go with Xavier Johnson. But I love every point you just made about Galloway, and I definitely agree. He's probably the number 1 player to watch.
For my player to watch, can I say a potential court storm?
That was the debate before.
We had a big debate
before
about
the podcast.
whether or not, if Indiana is able to pull it off, does the Hoosier crowd rush the court once again? We're not going to get into that because I believe that will go on for way too long. So we'll save that for another podcast for another day. But my player to watch, I'm going to say it's going to be Kel'el Ware. Because, again, how is he going to be able to perform against Zach Edey? A big thing. Can he stay out of foul trouble? He can at least see Zach Edey at least almost eye level. He's probably up to his forehead. But he's eye level with him, and he can actually... He can alter a couple of his shots is what I'm trying to say. So how will he be able to play again? Like I said, he's done a really good job and some of the best bigs in the nation so far. So once again, how can he perform in his first game as an Indiana Hoosier in the Indiana-Purdue rivalry? Guys, last thing. I went first before, so it's up to you guys first.
I can go.
Game predictions.
Game predictions. I think I said it before. This is going to be a very close game from start to finish. I'm not 100% sure of the result right now. I think it goes 50-50 right now. And I think Minnesota will be a big tell as well because, yes, Indiana does perform a lot better at home. So how they feed off Minnesota is actually going to be the first crowd that they have students back in the stands. Yep. So these next 2 games are going to be one that Indiana is going to have even more of a presence behind them than they have in these last home games where they've still performed very well. So with that said, I am going to go.
Pick 'em, Audrey.
Indiana 79-78. I think it's going to come down to the very last second, and a big part of this game, which has really not been a strong suit for Indiana, is closing out the games, like you've said many times. So exactly right. This is the game that they are going to have to close out because you already know it's going to come down to one of the last minutes.
Okay, wow, we've got some stunners right now. Thomas, keep it going.
I love Audrey's in-depth breakdown that she gives every time. I think it's great.
Oh, thank you.
Come on,
it's very
Thomas.
well worded. I'm going to go another high-scoring affair, especially in this rivalry. I'm going to go 83-80 IU.
Whoa!
I think it's going to be...
But we know who Hayden's picking.
Wow!
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, Hayden, you're always very animated. I love that too.
Okay.
I'm going IU. I think it's going to be... Again, we have a full game to go before we get to Purdue, and we don't know what's going to happen. But it's going to be back and forth. IU is coming off a 3-game win streak against Purdue. This would be monumental in terms of their season and making the tournament. And if they are going to win one of the 2 against Purdue, I think it obviously is going to be the one that's home. And so I'm going to give it to them. I think it's going to be a high-scoring affair, 83-80 IU. It's going to be another close one.
I love how optimistic you guys are. It really makes me feel a lot better coming from Indiana, growing up in Indiana, growing up a Hoosier. I love your all's optimism.
Now, time for some realism.
But I don't think this Indiana team is where they need to be to knock off one, if not the best team in the nation. This is not Kansas. This is not Auburn. This is not UConn. This is not any of those teams that they have played so far this season. This is another monster in the Purdue Boilermakers that used to have Indiana's number. So far, Indiana's starting to get that back. I don't believe Indiana is where they need to be to knock off the Boilermakers so far. I just haven't seen it so far this season. So with that being said, I'm taking the Purdue Boilermakers 79-70.
I agree that this Indiana team does not compare to the Indiana team that has beat them 3 consecutive times. But I think this all goes back to what?
2.
2?
Won 2 games last year. They lost the one in West Lafayette in Trace Jackson Davis's junior year after the Rob Finney shot. 2 years ago.
Consecutive times. Sorry. Math
We're
went
good.
wrong in my head.
We're
but
good. Looking to make it 3.
Looking to make it 3. Yeah, so there you go. But just like Indiana, Purdue fell to Nebraska just 2 days ago, so on the road. So
K-State.
And by
coming on.
16, like Nebraska took care of them.
16, yeah. So this will be. It all really comes down to the environment. While yes, Purdue is used to Assembly Hall, nothing can compare to it.
Yeah, nothing can prepare you for the environment like Assembly Hall is going to be against the Purdue Boilermakers. It will by far be the biggest crowd. It will be much bigger. Yeah. I don't know how you can get much bigger than the Kansas crowd was, but it will get bigger than that. And a whiteout. Yep. Everybody, at least I believe all 3 of us, I don't know if you saw it last year, Thomas, against North Carolina last season, the whiteout against the Tar Heels, absolutely unreal. Awesome. It's going to be a great crowd. Yeah. There's no question about it.
Yeah, so I really do see that element kind of shocking Purdue. And I think that obviously the Hoosiers, as always, as they do at home, will feed off of it.
Thomas, any final thoughts?
Not really. I was just going to say I agree. I mean, I guess I do, yeah, because here I go. But, yeah, Purdue, they're unbelievable. They're fantastic. Yes. But I just want to say they're not invincible. They're not invincible. Nebraska just beat them by 16. Is that their only loss this season?
No,
Northwestern.
The Wildcats. So, both losses on the road, and I believe... let me double check it. You keep going because I want to double check something.
Yeah, so that's 2 losses this year, both on the road. And on top of that, like they had a couple shockers last year. 3 or 4?
They have not lost a road game in the last, I believe, 3 to 4 years without being court rushed.
Yeah, I saw that quote. That's
again,
crazy.
Matt Painter's exactly right. Purdue has gained this respect because they've gained that notoriety for being one of the best teams in all of college basketball. If you're going to lose a game on the road, the opposing team is going to court rush you. I don't care how dangerous it can get. They don't care. They're college students. They will rush the court, and if Indiana can get the job done, they will rush the court too.
I saw one thing about that was crazy when Painter said that, and like hearing that out loud, he said, "Think about it." I did. That's crazy. But I did read the subtweets, and some Michigan State account said,
"Oh no,
false! We beat you, and we didn't rush." I didn't fact check it, so I have no idea. But Michigan State, some page claimed that they beat Purdue recently and didn't court storm. Didn't fact check it. Not sure. But yeah, I guess that's my final thought.
Well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Throwing Chairs podcast. Be sure to follow the Hoosier Network on all of our social media platforms to stay up to date on Indiana basketball. Until next time, we'll see if Indiana can knock off one of the top-ranked Boilermakers in Assembly Hall. Alongside Audrey Marr, Thomas Montalbano, I'm Hayden Smith, hanging up the phone on this episode of TCP. Have a great day, Hoosier fans.